Hi, everyone. Randal Schwartz here, host of FLOSS Weekly. This week, Randi Harper joins me after a long absence. She's going to help me talk to the guys about Selenium, the web testing framework that tests the browsers all the way end to end. You're going to want to hear about this, so stay tuned.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth for FLOSS Weekly is provided by Cachefly at CACHEFLY.com.
This is FLOSS Weekly with Randal Schwartz and Randi Harper, episode 161 for April 13th, 2011, Selenium. This episode of FLOSS Weekly is brought to you by Netflix. Watch thousands of TV episodes and movies streamed to your PC, Mac, or TV instantly. Plus, get DVDs by mail in about one business day. For your free 30-day trial, go to netflix.com/twit. It's time for FLOSS Weekly, the show with free, libre, open source software. I am your host, Randal Schwartz, Merlin at Stonehenge.com, bringing you the big projects, the small projects, the big people, the little people, the important people, the people you might not have heard of, the all sorts of interesting projects. You hear me week after week come in here. It's a labor of love. I love to do this show because I always get to talk to some of the most interesting people. And to help me along, I almost always have a co-host. This week's co-host, she's been absent for a while, but we decided to bring her back because she's finished moving now. So it's none other than, you know her as Free BSD Girl, Randi Harper. Randi, welcome back to the show.
Hi, it's great to be back.
And you were missing because you were moving, right?
Moving and taking a little bit of a break from open source because I'd been working pretty hard on FreeBSD for a while and just needed a little bit of time off. But I'm back now. I'm back now and working on code and on FLOSS Weekly.
Well, very good. We've got you for at least a couple of slots during this quarter, and so if you like hearing Randi today, just keep tuning in. We'll get some more shows with her a little bit later on. I do want to mention my guest, though, before we get a little bit too much further along, and that is my guest today is Jason Huggins. Jason Huggins is one of the co-founders of the project that created the Selenium web testing framework. Now, we've talked a lot about testing on this show, but this is web testing sort of at the retail end, sort of by moving browsers around, by actually sort of driving browsers to go through their various steps of click here, see if this is the right thing on the page, click over here, find the link that has that. We're able to test sort of end-to-end, including things that have fancy interfaces with JavaScript like Ajax and stuff. And this is a really important thing, especially in this day where we're really moving most of our stuff down towards the browser, making smarter browser apps and things like that, high-end apps. And we've talked to actually some people on this show that are doing that sort of thing. So Selenium is for testing all the way down to the end of the stream. I'm really looking forward to bringing him on. He's also got a project called Sauce Labs, which allows us to actually test across multiple platforms in the cloud so that we can test on browsers we don't have access to. So I'm looking forward to talking to him. But before we do that, we have a sponsor. Yay, sponsors. Love sponsors. My sponsor is Netflix. I am a very happy Netflix user. I have been a Netflix subscriber, actually only for a few months now, because I actually heard about him on the Twit network. But I tell you, it's just really changed the way that I watch television and I watch movies now. So the official words here is that this episode of FLOSS Weekly is brought to you by Netflix. Netflix delivers movies directly to your home, and that saves you time, money, and hassle. You can instantly watch thousands of TV episodes and movies streamed directly to your PC or Mac, or stream to your TV via Netflix-ready device, including an Xbox 360, a PS3, a Nintendo Wii, or a Roku. I have a Roku and I have a PS3, and they both have Netflix on them. I really enjoy watching it right there on my big screen TV. You can also get DVDs by mail in about one business day. You watch as many movies as you want, anytime you want. Never any late fees, no due dates or whatever. But the way I use Netflix is they suggest movies to me. They suggest television for me, or I can go search through and see what I want to see on that. And I must have, there's a queue. I must have like 400 movies and television shows in my queue. I could watch stuff on Netflix streaming every hour of every day for about 7 months before I'd even start to run out. So definitely want to check it out. It's a great way to see some very prominent things. Like just the other day, I noticed they had the IT Crowd on there. One of my favorite shows, the IT Crowd. It's only the first and fourth seasons, but it's still pretty good. They have complete seasons of a lot of TV shows and stuff. It's just a way to make it work. Really, really cool. So you can go get your own subscription to it. You can instantly watch lots of movies like the ones I just mentioned, or thousands of television episodes, other movies, when you register for a free trial membership. Go to netflix.com/twit, netflix.com/TWIT. You get a free trial, free first 30 days. Go check it out. We really thank Netflix for their support of Twit and FLOSS Weekly. And now, back to bringing on the guest. Do you have any questions before we bring the guest on, Randi?
No, I'm good to go.
So let's go ahead and bring Jason on. Jason, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, great. So I did probably a pretty poor job, not having ever used Selenium, sorry about that, of introducing Selenium at the beginning of the show. So why don't you give us sort of, well, first, this has been pretty successful in some of the past shows. Why don't you give us first the problem space that this fits in, and then tell me how Selenium came about to solve that problem.
Right. I started the project about 7 years ago when I was a developer at ThoughtWorks in Chicago, and I did not think my fame and fortune, if you will, would come from testing tools. Anyway, we were creating this time and expense system. A consulting shop is, their product basically is their invoice, and that invoice is time and expense stuff. So the time and expense system was kind of an important thing. I kind of got had the crazy idea, like, hey, let's do this project as this web app and this fancy thing in 2004. And the biggest feature was that we needed to do it fast. So this was just a little bit before JavaScript was actually okay to use. And so we did this web app. We did a couple of JavaScripty things. But the problem was these features that we were doing, all in browser, kind of using JavaScript to make the application interesting. It was buggy, especially cross-browser. So 1 week, a feature would be working in IE6, and then the next week it would be working in Mozilla. And the thing was, if someone would change something, I would report a bug saying, hey, it's broken in IE6. They would go fix that, but then they would break it in Mozilla. And this was actually pre-Firefox. I think Firefox was still like at 0.8 version. And so we had this, I call it like the sine wave of quality. We're keep ping-ponging back and forth between these things. And the developers, we had no QA department on the project. It was just developers. So I realized I can't... it's too boring of a job for the developers to ask them to test everything in all browsers all the time. So we figured, okay, let's write this tool where we could write one test, have that run across all the browsers so we can kind of go back to more interesting things. So it's kind of a combined thing of like the pain and frustration of these things breaking, and then kind of the boredom and tedium of having to do that manually all the time. So Selenium kind of, does the boring regression testing so we can kind of keep moving forward. So testing it's one of those things of it's like you don't realize you need it until you need it. Like if you're once you've got revenue or users on the line, like then testing is important. Like once you have that one call where you're woken up at 3 a.m. By a pager call, something's down, and you kind of want to start putting in processes to prevent that from being woken up late at night in the future. So that's kind of where testing comes in.
Cool. And I know, like I said, I mentioned a moment ago, I've never used Selenium, but I know a lot about the web, and I know a lot about testing because I come from a Smalltalk and Perl background. And one of the things that I've seen over and over again in my clients' spaces as I get hired by different companies to come in and clean up their code is that there's this severe lack of attention to testing. Mm-hmm. And so the problem you have is that everybody's afraid to make any changes to the code base because they don't know if that's going to break something in production. And it had to be even more, as you were pointing out, back in the early days of JavaScript, even having different implementation models, it must have been really interesting to be that fragile and trying to make sure that you even had an ability to make changes. Right.
I mean, at the very beginning of the project, we had huge arguments about whether we should even use JavaScript. And the big argument was, well, at the time, the standard way you do a web app it's called classic request response. If you click a button or do anything, you send all of the data back to the server processes it, and then just sends a very dumb text file, HTML file back to the screen. Very little interactivity. And state of the art of the tools then kind of assumed that, where there was nothing really interesting going on in JavaScript, so why would you need a testing tool to do that stuff? And so we had these arguments of, well, if we want to use this JavaScripty stuff, it's now kind of more risky to do it. There's no testing tools to use it. So like there was this argument of, do we write the app kind of to the state of what we can test, or do we modify our testing tools to match what crazy, insane things that we're trying to do in the browser? It was a very logical thing that, we've got better things to do than going inventing testing tools. We should just kind of do what we can, anyway, so went back and forth, but I think I finally won the argument. Yeah, do crazy stuff, but keep yourself, do safety stuff along the way to make sure you don't break everything.
Right. It's like you really want to climb the mountain, but if you don't put the little pitons at the right spots and have the double ropes and the people strapped together, your chances of succeeding more than twice are probably pretty low.
Yeah, I really like the rock climbing metaphor. It's starting to kind of grow on me, and I think that explains why some people are totally into testing and others are not. I think every developer deep inside themselves think they're one of those like free scaling guys. I don't need any safety harnesses. I'm just going to scale this wall. I'm going to be awesome. And actually, that's mostly true because software development really isn't rock climbing. If you fall, nothing happens, right? You're just still sitting on your couch. But once things are more on the line, there's users, there's revenue, then the risk of falling, if things break, it becomes a little bit more important to kind of do it right. And that's where the testing really kind of comes in.
And I've got to tell you, I've had some pretty big clients, and I've seen people roll out hot patches. They didn't get quite enough testing, and then you see the change log. You see hot patch goes out, Thursday afternoon, and then you see another hot patch goes out Friday afternoon to fix the things that Thursday broke, and obviously proof that there's not enough testing all the way through. And and you'd think people who've been doing this for a while would have figured this out by now, that testing is really essential. But no, it seems to still be this kind of thing where, as you're saying, I mean, you don't break your arm by putting a bug in code, thank God, or I'd have a lot more than just one broken arm, I tell you. So the other thing that I also see essential for Selenium and why it's great is that I hate doing the same thing over and over again in a browser to test my new code. And especially like if I have to read off a list because there's so many steps now to test my application, I've got to like go through a litany to figure out what to do next. And so this is something that Selenium solves, right? Yeah,
I mean, it was also kind of there's the testing market, I think, or testing traditionally was kind of done by non-programmers. And the project that we were on, we realized we had a testing problem, but we didn't have really the manpower or the budget to have dedicated testers. So we were a bunch of developers, and we figured this is kind of like a sign of like the rise of agile development. Basically, developers need to start doing testing. Is really kind of one of those ways to characterize agile. And so we were kind of crafty programmers. I think actually I do have a dog-eared copy of Learning Perl around here, and I think I've moved on to Python and JavaScript, but I think the ethic of being the lazy programmer, I think, still lives in me. And I think a lot of test automation comes from that wanting to just be lazy and not have to test everything all the time, every time.
Well, I was actually going to get into that in a couple of minutes, but as long as you brought that up, I'm really familiar with Perl's test harness framework, which is really, really good. It's now actually been abstracted out to be the TAP protocol.
Yeah, TAP is very cool.
And is TAP integrated with Selenium? Do we have some access to that?
I know I had a really, so no, I think is the short answer. We do have, Selenium is a complicated project. Like the mission is to, test all browsers, all on all operating systems and drive that from any language. So any particular one person can't do it all. So we have particular members that kind of contribute the Perl bindings. I think Luke Kloss is working on that. I work on various things. And so I'm not too plugged into the Perl side of things. I think there's lots of ancillary projects that people have done to plug in Selenium to their various test harnesses and things. So I wouldn't be surprised if there is a TAP protocol, but there's so many projects and so many frameworks to plug into. I don't have it at the top of brain. No offense to the person who did create the Selenium TAP interface. I'm sorry. I'll go check it out.
Well, that's the big thing here, though, is that because I know that the Perl community has just really been driven about testing. They've just been really going crazy with this. So that's why this is great. And my current client, Media Temple, is using Selenium to do all their end user browser testing. And oddly, this is the one day I'm not actually on site there, so I don't have anybody over my shoulder saying, "Ask them about this." So we'll just have to take the questions later. We do have a chat room live, by the way. If you're watching the show live, you can come in and ask questions as well. But I think Randi had a couple questions for you. Randi, you want to pick that up?
Sure.
Yeah. So I'm curious as to what your user base is like. I mean, how many users do you currently have for Selenium?
Let's see. So I think as far as like raw statistics, I think there's been like somewhere between 4 and 5 million like downloads of Selenium life to date. Wow. Just like that's from the project homepage. But it's kind of a tale of two user communities. There's kind of the project's kind of core ethic was kind of for developers by developers, and that's where we get all the language binding. So so half the user base are the Java programmers, Perl, Python, Ruby, C#, those folks doing things the right way. Then there's this other user base, which are actually kind of traditional testers. I like to call them, instead of focusing on the negative, like, hey, they're not coders, I like to call them the interactive users, where they use a record playback tool, and they record simple interactions and play those back. And actually, their skill set really is in like finding problems, investigating, exploratory testing, and finding things. Once they find something, then they record a simple test and play it back. And I feel for those people because they don't have the programming skills to kind of do fancy stuff, but they definitely I feel like the commercial testing market has really let them down by saying like no coding required. So we're trying to kind of reach out to them and kind of provide this path, like provide a record playback tool. That's the Selenium IDE is what a lot of people start with the project on, but also provide stuff like exporting to any of the supported languages and kind of get them on the path. So really it's like half the user community are just plain old programmers, and then the other half are kind of traditional testers who don't have a huge programming background, but they're using some automation. I guess you maybe call it like semi-automated stuff to get through their day. Their day.
Okay.
I hope that answers the question.
It does. So a while ago, I was actually doing some QA work, taking a break from sysadmin and dev stuff for a small startup in Mountain View. And I was looking for a tool like this, and I'm kind of surprised that I didn't find Selenium. It would have been perfect for what we were trying to do. I mean, doing web-based testing. So why doesn't everyone already use this?
Well, I think one of my sample tests for Selenium, like the hello world for a user interface test, is to go to Google, do some kind of search. So Selenium is the top hit for Ajax, or not top hit, but on the top 10 at least for Ajax testing. Although that's kind of an old word now. I don't know what the particular phrase you were looking for. I guess we have to start, work on our SEO and all that fun stuff. But I mean, if you do look for web testing tools, I think we kind of, I feel like in that we're kind of Selenium's kind of the usual suspects there. Yeah, so I'm actually curious kind of what you were looking for. Were you looking for a testing tool, or like?
At the time, I really didn't know. I was looking more for a testing tool, something to kind of automate web testing of the web portion of what I was working on. And yeah, it was really, I had problems finding things that did exactly what I wanted.
Got it. What did you end up using? What did you end up using?
Actually, nothing.
Got it. I mean,
yeah. Then I went to go work elsewhere, so I'm not really sure what they're using now.
Got it. Oh, you said Square?
Square?
Oh, sorry. It's all right. I didn't hear what you said at the end.
Oh, no, I ended up going to work elsewhere, so yeah, I'm not really sure what they're using now.
Got it.
So, tell me about the relationship between the IDE and the remote control. I mean, how do those parts play together?
Right. I think at the simplest level, they're two separate user communities. The people who use the IDE kind of stay there, and very few people kind of upgrade, or even know that there's this notion of kind of upgrading your skills to kind of just writing stuff in code. There is a feature, an underutilized feature in the Selenium IDE that if you go to the Tools menu, Options, and you can export a recorded script to any of the supported languages. And I think that's kind of a great way to kind of use a record playback tool ethically, where you, or at least to kind of promote it and push it, where you record something. Actually, the great kind of use case is like you've got some new feature, or you're maybe trying to kind of lock down a particular bug that somebody reported. You kind of go through, replicate what the person said. Because I mean, very often when a bug comes in, it's like, okay, what did you do? What did you click on? What URL did you go to? Kind of get that down. Use Selenium IDE to record that, and then once that's recorded, export that to a real language, and then plug that into the rest of your build process, your continuous integration systems, all that kind of stuff. But there's a whole bunch of other kind of a big portion of the user community doesn't use the IDE. They just write straight code, and they've basically got two types of code that they're writing. Their application feature code, and then the test code that tests those things. And they just kind of spend their whole day in in their whatever it's Eclipse or IDE or I spend my whole day in a terminal window, Vim, and a REPL, and I'm done. But some people just spend time in those text editors, and that's how they write their tests.
So how does Sauce Labs fit into all of this?
Right. Glad you asked. So the problem that I saw is so Selenium solved the first problem of, we gotta test this stuff, and it's boring to do it manually all the time. After that problem is solved, I saw this in a bunch of projects at ThoughtWorks, and then left ThoughtWorks to go to Google. And the thing was, after you have a whole bunch of tests, everyone kind of sets things up the wrong way. You've got an average Selenium test takes about a minute to run, testing a couple of features in a browser. A lot of people just set up one machine under their desk to run all these tests. And if you have about 60 tests, that takes about an hour. At that point, the bigger frustration is now you have to wait an hour to find out if you broke anything. So the idea that I saw at ThoughtWorks, and that we also did at kind of scale on the Selenium farm at Google, was this amazing idea of throwing more hardware at the problem. You distribute the tests across many machines, and now instead of taking 60 minutes, if you have 60 machines, you can now run them all in parallel in 1 minute. So where Sauce Labs comes in is, I think, the whole cloud computing thing. I'm kind of annoyed at all the companies now that everything is cloud, but in the kind of academic sense of what EC2 originally was, where this elastic supply of machines, testing ends up being kind of this killer app for cloud computing, where we need a whole bunch of machines to run a whole bunch of tests in a very short amount of time, and then you throw them away when you're done. So Sauce really is kind of a cloud computing kind of test infrastructure for software testing, and that's what we kind of do. So I saw it at the small scale on projects when I was a consultant at ThoughtWorks. I saw it at the very big scale when Selenium was using to test all of Google Apps on the Selenium farm, and Sauce Labs is kind of the just in the middle, kind of like people who need to do testing, but they don't want to fork out all the money to have this massive test lab to test all the different permutations, and they don't want to dedicate someone to kind of keep all those plates spinning. So it's just kind of like for those people who need testing, but they don't have the budget or the willpower to kind of do it at kind of a scale that Google does it at.
So how long ago did you start Sauce Labs?
We started it in July of 2008, so we're coming up on the three-year anniversary in a couple months.
How many employees do you have currently?
I think we're at 13. And I'm out here in Chicago, but it's based in San Francisco. So I'm on I like to joke, a gravitational orbit around the city of San Francisco.
So do you see it expanding in the future? I mean, as far as employees go, I know there's a lot of people out there that would probably love to know if you're hiring.
Right. I think it's one of those things of like maybe check back in a couple months. I think we're definitely got world domination plans that are just kind of waiting to be implemented. So yeah. So don't call me tomorrow, but in a couple months, definitely.
I'm looking at what Sauce Labs is able to provide for me as a small business. Say, if I have let's use one of my other longtime clients, Insight Cruises. We have a product that right now is pretty plain CGI Perl stuff, but we're looking at rolling it out with some fancy jQuery, drag and drop kind of cool thing. And I know that my client and I both run OS 10. So, and we might have access to, say, Safari and to Firefox and maybe a couple of other browsers, but we certainly aren't able to run it on all the potential customer client bases. So is Sauce Labs the sort of thing where I could commission you guys to run my tests on multiple browsers? And how many browsers are there actually that we need to test with? And I'm probably going to be staggered by the number.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of ridiculous. So so in the OS 10 specific thing, we don't have that now, but it's definitely in our roadmap. I don't know if this is a scoop here, but I think it's on our Q2 goals that just, Q2 just started to get OS 10 out there. So that's actually just an interesting thing to, how do you legally do it? How do you pragmatically and technically do OS 10? Because we have to do it virtualized anyway. So that's one thing. But then just from your other question of just how many browsers are there, I think we've got Firefox 3, 5, 3, 6, 4, IE 6, 7, 8, 9 is now out there. We've got Safari on Windows is what we have. There's also Opera, Chrome. Chrome is interesting because there's really no version of that. Chrome is cool where they just constantly are pushing out updates to people, so it's very hard to be on an old version of Chrome. but yeah, and then on Linux and Windows is what we support. But kind of the mission of FLOSS and Selenium, and currently Selenium supports more than FLOSS does. We're still figuring out the OS 10 part for our service. But yeah, all browsers, all platforms. And the other new thing to that is, and new is kind of interesting because mobile's been around for a couple of years, but in the testing world, testing tools are traditionally kind of a lagging indicator of the hotness of some kind of technology. So just, I think 2010 was really the year that a lot of companies really got serious about how they're going to be testing their iPhone apps. And so iPhone and Android are like now the next new frontier for testing. And again, that's also from a service point of view, more complications, because now it's not just running these operating systems, but we now have to run the simulators and emulators and get that all up and running. So I guess I like to say, like, I really geek out on this stuff and setting up all this infrastructure. So it's like, let me do it so you don't have to. But it's kind of dizzying how many configurations there are. And then you throw on top of that, you don't just have one test. You've got a whole bunch of features that you wrote. So it's like 100 features across all these configurations. It gets pretty complicated pretty fast.
It now occurs to me that when I go to a banking website or a shopping website and it breaks on Safari, that I shouldn't be as surprised as I am.
Right. I mean, it's one of those things of like testing is like by definition an infinite activity. Like my simple case is, how would you test a calendar widget? Or if you can go left or right on the previous month, next month tab infinitely. Like, you're not going to test every month and every day. So just in features, there's kind of infinite places you could go to test various scenarios. And then all the different configurations. You've got, I know some places where it's not just that they have to test Safari or Firefox, but they test it, let's say, in the case of, IE, they also have to test IE on Windows 32-bit and Windows 64-bit. Operating systems. And I mean, the configuration aspect of all the different permutations of what you have to test is ridiculous. So yeah, at some point people just draw a line saying below this, that's it. We don't care. We saw this, or we see people trying to do this with IE6, developers, shops saying IE6 is dead to us. We're not supporting it anymore. Not everyone can kind of do that. So yeah, I think our kind of goal, I think, is making it easier to test more configurations, kind of make each individual test and test configuration easier so you can kind of do more of it, so you can kind of have more confidence and support more browsers.
Very cool. And actually what you brought up was something really interesting, and I've had problems with the testing, and that is, first, testing at any level seems to enforce some sort of rigidity in the interface, because you're afraid to change the interface because you have 72 tests that all expect it to look like this. So how do you deal with that at a JavaScript testing level?
Well, I think this is probably kind of an untold story of Selenium, and I think I'm not sure if it's a dirty secret or not, but there's this ethic in agile development and now kind of test-driven development that you write your tests first. The thing is, there's a huge asterisk when it comes to the user interface, and the dirty secret of the Selenium project is that because we started doing these features in JavaScript and in the browser, but we didn't have a testing tool while we were, shipping these features. So about 6 months into the project, after we'd done 6 months of production releases and features, that's when Selenium kind of came online. So we had that 6-month lag between feature creation and testing with Selenium. So that is, there's this thing of it is possible to do testing too soon, especially in the user interface. And I think a lot of people, where they get frustration with user interface tools and specifically Selenium, and they blame Selenium, is that because right when a feature is brand new, you're constantly moving things around. I think having it all locked down in a Selenium test and user interface test, it feels more like a straitjacket. You don't have that freedom to kind of move things around. But once things are kind of locked in, the dust is settled on the feature, it's kind of like people are using it, it's kind of good. At that point, Selenium's like really sweet spot is to kind of write that regression test, make sure that feature never breaks again or just breaks, period. So then you can kind of move on to interesting things. But not enough people realize that. Yeah, definitely write some unit tests as you're creating that feature, but you should probably wait to let the dust settle on your features, especially in the user interface, before you write a kind of a user interface Selenium-focused test for that.
Okay, that answers the first part of the problem. Now, the second part of the problem you actually brought up by alluding to a calendar testing system. So if I've got like a live calendar that comes up and I want to test to make sure that today works correctly and in advance to tomorrow works correctly, well, the kinds of links and data that's going to be is going to be different if I test this next week versus now. How do you handle that kind of variability in Selenium?
Well, it reminds me, sadly, I've learned a lot. How do you become wise by making mistakes? The project that Selenium came from, one of the funny stories was we had this exact problem because we had timesheets, you've got approvals, like you can't report time too far in the future or the past to kind of account for people like putting the wrong year into these timesheets. And the problem was we learned the way to do it the wrong way is to hard code dates into the timesheet. So what we would do is we would put some dates far in the future, and then I remember a month later into the project, all of a sudden these tests that were always working all of a sudden started failing. Mm-hmm. Well, we noticed that, wow, it's like day 31 since whatever we coded this test, and that hard-coded date now triggered that you can't do this more than 3 days in the future or the past. So the wrong way to do it is specifically, have very date-specific hard-coded things in there. The better way is to kind of have support code. So if you're testing some kind of a, let's say in this example, you can't do it 2 weeks in advance. You write some kind of a function that can kind of give you some kind of dynamic date back. So in your actual test, you're not saying, April 13th, you're saying, get me today's date, or get me today's date plus 2 weeks, or something like that. And so your tests can have a date in that, but you're not explicitly hard coding something. So that's kind of one thing. I guess the other point is, testing is kind of like, people who really get into it, it's kind of like arguing with philosophy majors. Like they're very annoying. You quickly get to, the definitions of things. Like what is a test and why do we do this and all these things. One of the things is it's very treacherous and dangerous to be testing business logic in the user interface. So if you're really wanting to make sure that for a particular date you get a particular, thing showing up on your agenda, it actually makes more sense to not do that through the user interface. Like throw away the browser, specifically kind of write just a nice little function of code, almost like imagine. Actually, not imagine. Like this is a great way to kind of test your system. If you have an API, like a REST interface or something like that, go through that. If you want to test a very, very explicit, input output for this date, here's the list of responses. Doing that through a browser is kind of a ham-fisted way to do it, which of course is how everyone does it. But really, there's kind of a there are many ways to use and abuse a user interface testing tool. But the biggest way to kind of get in trouble fast is, you're testing the user interface, but what you're really testing is the business logic. You're now kind of having to go through the user interface, and if a button breaks, you don't really care about the button. You really wanted to test that for this date, give me back my agenda. So you start blaming the testing tool for not really giving you that data because the test broke because the button moved or something. So if you're really doing lots of corner cases, lots of kind of data-driven kinds of things, try to write some kind of test harness that you basically can skip the browser, go directly at your kind of your business logic stuff, and then kind of reserve the kind of the Selenium test, the user interface tests for more of the kind of simple scenarios. I would say like the best case for Selenium is you kind of incidentally test the business logic, but the more important thing is it's kind of an end-to-end test. It's your last mile, it's your smoke test, it's your sanity check that you've already tested a whole bunch of other stuff at a lower level. But this is kind of like making sure that everything's kind of connected together correctly. So you really shouldn't use Selenium to test every permutation of like testing for every date. Here's every response, but you definitely should test it at least once, and then go a little bit more beyond that until you feel like you've got some kind of until you've kind of like walked around the app, clicked enough buttons. I joke it's kind of like, every time you push to production, every developer's got like a list of things that they frantically go and make sure that still works. You go to the home page, you click the login button, make sure you get the form. There's a couple of just random things everyone kind of does in 30 seconds. Mm-hmm. That's the great category of stuff for Selenium tests. But if you really want to dig into kind of testing input output, Selenium isn't really the right tool for that, and user interface tools for that matter.
So just to put this in a little more concrete terms, because I think I've got what you're saying here, and I know it from also my web testing days, and which still continue, by the way, that taking even that 2-minute screencast that I saw that had testing, finding a search term on Google, you wouldn't test necessarily the quality of the search results with Selenium, because that's going to vary. You probably use the APIs for that, where you'd search for certain terms and see if in the top 5, like pages should be there or there.
Right.
But what you're testing with Selenium in that example is there a place where I can even type a query on that front page, and when I press the search button and go, does it actually bring back a page that has some links on it? That'd really be the level of testing that you want at that point, right?
Yeah. So it's kind of a coarse-grained kind of a thing. You want to make sure that you can walk through the app and nothing blows up. Exactly.
Okay. So I think I'm following along with that. So where's Selenium headed? What's still missing in it? And where, if you had like 50 new people to make some more code, where would you take it now?
Well, from a social point of view, we're kind of we're in the transition from Selenium 1 to Selenium 2, and there's a whole bunch of code changes under the hood, but it's also kind of a good cultural change for the project. The ethic of Selenium 1 was kind of worse is better, where we got a whole bunch of stuff working in JavaScript, and but for all of our language bindings, we kind of code generated it from some crazy stuff. Basically, only one person on the project at any given time kind of knew how anything worked. Now we're kind of breaking that up. I guess now we're kind of better is the approach for the project. We're specifically making everything like the language bindings, for example, where instead of code generating that from like one master kind of JavaScript and XSLT monstrosity thing, we're now making it so we are expecting and encouraging and hoping that every language community, someone from that community comes and becomes the maintainer of the bindings for Selenium for that language. So we've got Alistair Scott, who's maintaining the Ruby bindings. And we've got David Burns in Python maintaining the Python bindings, making the so if you've got a language that we don't officially support, our big 4 right now are C#, Java, Python, and Ruby. Luke, I think, is a maintainer of the Perl stuff. I think Sebastian Bergman is PHP, but if I think Sebastian might need help. He's the author of PHP Unit and kind of did the Selenium stuff on the side. But we definitely need more help on PHP, and that's obviously a language we can't ignore. There's a whole bunch of stuff. So if you're a scheme programmer or other kind of a thing, if like we really need people to kind of step in and contribute. And then on the other side, you've got all the browsers, and I think we're kind of making it, pushing it out that way. So we're actually gotten some really good traction here, where the Chrome, like being able to actually instrument and automate Chrome, that's no longer really the job of the Selenium project and the committers. The Chrome, what do you want to call it? The execution engine for Selenium, the automation smarts, that's actually now shipped in the Chrome browser itself. The Chrome team now owns the how do we actually automate this stuff? So that's cool. So that's kind of actually kind of the world domination plan for the Selenium project is the only thing left on the project in a couple of years from now will just be the test suite. We have people in the community supporting the bindings, and then we have the browser vendors actually supporting the automation, the actual stuff that does the automation. And really, Selenium is kind of like the test suite that kind of certifies like, okay, people can actually test their apps on those browsers. So we definitely have, so we have got Selenium basically embedded and shipping with, or at least the Selenium bindings, the API, I mean. API support is fully supported in Chrome and Opera. We've got some, I think the Mozilla guys, I don't want to put them on the spot. I think they're on board with the idea. And then, we'll get all the browsers there at some point. So if you're a browser vendor, we definitely need your help. Specifically, if you work at Apple or Microsoft, hint hint. And then if you're in a language, if you've got a particular language that we don't support yet, we definitely need someone from the community to step up and help, help with that.
So we've had a question from a user on IRC that I'd like to address. And Craig asked, can you address the Selenium ecosphere, and as in what areas are left open for consulting services, web services, plugins, or add-ons?
Right. So actually, a lot of people come to me and ask, like, hey, do you have a Selenium consultant, a testing consultant to refer? And at least from my kind of business perspective, I would love to our business is to run the tests, but not to write them. And I really would like to get a good base of people who know how to write tests, but also be able to help the customer like write test frameworks. Like, and it's also not even about the testing. It's like, well, what are they doing? How risky is the stuff? Like, really kind of they're basically software developers, consultants. I would love to have a base of people that I can refer to. I've got a couple of usual suspects of places. I came from ThoughtWorks in Chicago. They do stuff like this. Pivotal Labs in San Francisco. We're big friends of them, but I really would love to have this huge base of people I can kind of like refer work to. So I guess there's kind of like two aspects as far as like opportunities for consulting. There's kind of just a pure like heads down, crank out some test cases. But I don't think that's really kind of a path. I think there's a market there. Companies spend a lot of money on like, hey, I just need this thing to be tested. Go find some bodies and throw at it. I think that the really better way to do it is kind of be integrated with the project to find out exactly what they're doing. And you're this hybrid role of you're a consultant. You're helping them implement the features, and you're kind of doing you're doing it right. You're testing this stuff and you're plugging it into CI. Yeah, there's definitely opportunities there. I'm not interested anymore in writing the tests because running the tests are a big enough of a problem to handle.
Cool.
Very cool. Very cool. Hey, I just had a couple of quick questions. We're sort of running out of time here. So a couple of quick questions. One is, as I was watching that 2-minute screencast on Google, I brought that up earlier, does Paul Hammond have a really high voice?
Does he have a really high voice?
Well, who was that narrated that video? But
I don't know which video that you saw. If it was Paul's voice. It's kind of a thick Scottish accent.
Oh, maybe it is then. Maybe it is. It's a little higher than mine. That's all. Okay, so that's good.
I never thought of the pitch of his voice as being novel. I always thought it was interesting that with this thick accent. He says "dude" all the time. It's kind of funny to hear the phrases he says, but.
Okay, now Paul's going to take this offensively. Sorry, I didn't mean it that way. But
I definitely have to give Paul huge credit for the project because I was just this kid working on other stuff, and I thought I created this thing that was kind of cool, but I had no idea. I had no idea that there was a thing called that they were testing tools and a whole economy of people selling a whole bunch of stuff in this space, and. Anyway, so Paul saw this, and we were at ThoughtWorks at the time, and he saw that hey, this is cool. People need to know about this. So in the kind of I don't know which book this is from, but every project needs various players, actors in its lifespan. So you need like the crazy idea guy. I guess that's me for the original idea, but I didn't think that this needed to be told. So Paul served this very big role where he saw something and needed to tell other people about it. So he was a little bit of the John the Baptist for the project. And he's one of those unsung heroes that he doesn't get enough credit on the project. I'm partly to blame for that. So I'm making sure that, Paul gets a lot of credit for getting Selenium out there, getting the message out there. He wrote the very first language bindings actually for Java. He did a lot of the initial kind of architecture for things. So he's a good guy.
Great. And yes, no offense at all intended, really. And I'm familiar with that kind of relationship because I know like Larry Wall had a great idea to have this little language called Perl, but it took me to come along and figure out how to commercialize it and actually make a living off it for the last 20 years. So I really see how you probably had that same relationship with Paul. So it sounds like a really great way to have gotten that started. I think it's really interesting that we have to have teams of people to bring together to really make projects work. We have people that are visionaries. We have people that are sort of bring it back to practical, and people that sort of like are willing to stay in the dirt, getting all the low level stuff done, and everybody enjoying sort of what they're doing because they're all committed to that level. But it's really a great way to have teamwork there. The other thing is that I seem to have a note here about something about Legoland. Do you want to explain that?
Yes. So I think. Oh, shoot! I have the ring box is upstairs. Let's see. So I'm got married in 2003. This would be 2002. I had to do the math. So I do remember the dates and the years. I had to work backwards. So 2002, I proposed to my wife at Legoland. And the original idea was a couple months earlier, I actually wanted to propose at Times Square, like the real Times Square in New York City. Missed opportunity, mostly because I just didn't get my act together and had a ring. Didn't have one. So a couple months later, went to my parents are in the LA area. That's where I kind of spent, grade school, high school from that area. So anyway, flew out to visit the folks, and we're going to go to Legoland. And anyway, brought my girlfriend along with me. So I had this plan hatched that I was going to. The cover story was that I was going to go to Legoland with my nephew, and we're just going to have a fun day around. And anyway, oddly, he got injured the day before, so my cover story was blown. I had to invent this excuse to go down to Legoland with me just and my girlfriend without the nephew. Anyway, so I did a terrible job of that. I think at some point she kind of knew something was going on. So we drove down to Legoland anyway. And we got there, went to the New York, or the Times Square miniature in Lego and proposed there. So I made this little Lego ring box. And it's interesting, those little Lego guys, like, they got the little kind of C-shaped hands. It's the perfect width. If you kind of hold the guy back a little bit, it's the perfect width to actually hold a ring. So kind of got the ring in there, and we gave her the ring. She said yes, and I figured that's actually kind of a good. I don't know, really into this testing thing, but I figured and this is a good test. I think if she said yes in this particular environment, that I'm this crazy idea guy who kind of does wacky things. And I figured kind of proposing at Legoland was kind of a wacky thing to do. That's definitely kind of my personality. And if she would be, sign up for that, then she's definitely a keeper.
But, given that as a standard, I'm not sure where I'd have to propose to somebody for them to accept me and all the craziness that I am. Great. That's a great story. That's an incredibly great story. And on that note, I just want to ask one more question. Well, actually, I got two more questions. VI or Emacs?
Oh, VI. Absolutely.
You stabbed me.
Go VI.
And
what was that? Go VI.
Go VI.
Just go VI.
Or Vim.
Also,
I mean, actually, is there even a VI versus Vim, or does everyone just assume Vim when
you
you say
Vim? Yeah,
right.
you needed to have Vim to even keep up with Emacs. So I give you guys that as an automatic default.
I do want to insert one thing as far as when we're talking about people and important stuff to the project.
Yes.
I do also want to give a shout out to the team at Google, and specifically Simon Stewart. He's really kind of the future face, the current face of the project. As we go from Selenium 1, I'm kind of the Selenium 1 guy, me and Paul. And Simon Stewart, it really is Selenium 2. We merged with a project called WebDriver. That's his thing, and really he would be a great guest to have on the future if you guys haven't hit a tolerance or a level of testing tools yet. Simon's a very interesting character. I would really recommend you chatting with him. But he's kind of like definitely the future of the project, and he's very important.
Very good. And so my other one last question was, is there anything we left out that you really wanted to make sure our audience is aware of?
Test your stuff, right? Don't wait until it's too late. Don't wait till you get paged at 3 a.m. and you lose revenue and customers. Testing, like, I think it's one of those. There are things in life in software development, like you ain't going to need it. Testing is one of those things that you are going to need. It is easy to kind of overdo it, but you are going to need it. So you should kind of the earlier the better, makes it easier.
Very cool. Very cool. Okay. And I back that 100% as well. So I just want to thank you again for being on the show, Jason. Thanks for waking up. Well, it's early for us, not so early for you now that I know you're in Chicago, but thanks for coming on the show.
Excellent. Thank you for having me.
Great. That was Jason Huggins, who is doing lots and lots of stuff. One of the co-creators of the original Selenium and now very active in the project. What do you think, Randy? What was that all about?
I think it was great. I mean, it was interesting to learn about. I wish I had known about it a year ago. When I was actually looking for something like this, I would have loved to have tried it out.
Well, that's good then, because some of the people listening to this show, of which there are many, and I thank you guys all for your loyalty to the show, I will now be finding, oh yeah, that's exactly what I need. I need a web testing thing that can deal with all that JavaScript and all that Ajax stuff that I've got, and so that's really good. I mean, it really is hard to test that last mile, because if you build a correct sort of scripts to test your model code and some of your controller code, you get to that view layer where you're actually just finally translating all that data finally into some presentation system. And it's really hard without something like Selenium to wander through, and especially do cross-browser support, make you able to test it on all those. God, how many browsers did you list? Something like 13, 15, something like that. It was crazy. So I'm happy to be testing another 2 that I have on my laptop, but the rest sound like a lot of craziness going on.
Yeah, it's definitely a part of testing that I think is overlooked. I mean, people test on one version of IE, maybe, and one version of Firefox, and they just kind of let the others go and assume it'll work, or they just don't care. I mean, I can't even begin to list the number of websites I've been to that only work with Internet Explorer because I'm guessing they haven't done testing for the other platforms.
Or they may just think that, that us poor Mac and Linux people out here are like such a niche in the market that, they don't care if they offend, 10 to 15% of their market because they just don't see that's how it would be. And I love it when they justify it based on their browser stats they get on their websites. Well, look, only IE comes here. Well, that's probably because your site only works with IE. So, of course, it's going to be self-focused, right?
Yeah, there's that. And I think browser users are getting to be more fickle. I mean, it used to be that people were hardcore into IE a very long time ago, and then they got hardcore into Firefox, and everybody loved Firefox. And now you see even more of the user base going over to Chrome, and people trying out, you see a lot of people who just use Mac using Safari. And I mean, there are so many more browsers out there you have to consider than there were 10 years ago.
And especially when you have this option now, I mean, now with almost everybody I know has a smartphone, you've got to be able to test your website to make sure that it works on phones because it's and it's no longer that I don't know if you remember the whole craze, 10 years ago of building WAP sites, because they would fit on the tiny phones. And now it's like I've got mobile Safari is as far as I'm concerned, Safari. What I really like, though, is that people are building websites that proportion themselves to the right size for the mobile Safari. That if I go to, like, say, IMDb or some of these other sites, they actually have an entirely different interface for my mobile Safari than if I go on the main one. You can always select back and forth. Google, I think, was one of the pioneers in doing that. But testing all this has got to be crazy because it's like, okay, so I changed my data model and all the different ways I view that data. I now have to also catch up with that. So I'm appreciating the Selenium project because I'm seeing that's going to be essential. I don't even know what else is in this space. I should have asked him that, but this has clearly got to be the leader and clearly the best open source example of this.
Yeah, there's one other example I can think of. I can't remember the name, though, for the life of me, because I downloaded it once. It was in beta. It worked okay, but it didn't sound nearly as fancy as Selenium is. It didn't have nearly the number of options. So I think this, now that more people are going to know about it, I mean, it sounds like it's spreading. It'd be great to see more people using it.
Indeed, indeed. And so what I usually do here is have some awkward transition to my upcoming guest list. I'm not even going to bother with the awkward transition. I'm just going to say, here's what's coming up on FLOSS Weekly. That's the entire transition you get. Next week, we've got Email Evolve on Jitsi, formerly SIP Communicator. That's a VoIP client, desktop client that understands audio and video. It's supposed to work with a lot of cool things like Asterisk. I'm going to be looking forward to that show. We have Philip Brown, Ben Walton's coming on, talking to us about OpenCSW, which is one of the three packaging systems for Solaris, particularly one that's being used mostly in Open Solaris. Dustin J. Mitchell's coming on to talk about BuildBot, which is a building testing platform for Python, which will be fun. I have to get a Python expert on that week because I don't know anything about indenting properly. Matthew Flatt's going to talk to us about Racket, which is a education language originally called Scheme, SLT Scheme, something like that, PLT Scheme. I'm going to get it wrong. It's not in my notes. I'm so sorry. But anyway, it's a teaching language based on Scheme. Looks pretty fun. And Kosuke Kawaguchi was the leader of the Hudson project, which is now forked to become Jenkins. That is a building framework, building testing, continuous testing framework, which should be sort of the testing of the back end of this stuff. So I think actually Selenium can plug into Jenkins, if I remember correctly. Curtis Jewell, Strawberry Perl. Strawberry Perl is a version of Perl running on Windows that has normal interfaces rather than the PPM interface that ActiveState Perl had. So you can install any module you want instead of just the ones that ActiveState made available for you. Somewhere also on the schedule is Sitaram Charamarte. He's going to talk to us about Gitolite, which is a GitHub-style hosting service for Git repos. So you can have a private one of those, or you can have a shared one of those without having to get yourself involved in GitHub. Lots of other people on the short list, still trying to book a few empty slots. I think we'll be coming up on those pretty soon. Let's see. You can find out more about me by following me on Twitter. That's Merlyn on Twitter, Merlyn with a Y. And if you follow me on Twitter, you'll see that I'll be karaoke streaming tonight again. So if you're like following me on that, tonight being the day we're taping this show, if you're hearing this a couple days later, obviously it won't make much difference. I'll be back in LA next week. If you want to hang out with me there, just follow my Twitter feed. And I do read all of the tweets that come at me. And I'm also recording more shows for StarshipSofa.com, my science fiction hat that I wear from time to time. I put on and read a 20 or 30 or 50-minute piece for that. And yes, Tony Smith, if you're listening, I am recording the next one coming up today. I haven't had time to do it until today. So that's everything I want to plug today. Randi, what have you been up to, and what do you want people to know about you?
Well, I recently moved to Seattle, which is awesome. I love it here. If you want to follow me on Twitter, my Twitter handle is FreebieSkiGirl.
Wow. Okay, that's short.
Yeah, that's it.
Okay.
I don't have much else to say. I'm just enjoying the rain.
Very good. Yeah, you got to get used to that. If you moved up from, well, the Bay Area rained a little bit, but I bet
No.
Seattle has been a lot more gray and
Not in
icky.
Sunnyvale. In Sunnyvale, the name is very apt. It doesn't rain for like 5 or 6 months at a time. And here, I moved here in the fall, and that's when it starts raining here. So I think I have seen maybe 6 days of sun since I moved here 6 months ago.
Well, that's typical for Seattle and Portland. I grew up with it, of course. I'm all really familiar with it, but I love it that the Californians, and I'm going to paint them with a broad sweep, and they're all my friends now, but they would move up here and they would come visit like in summer. They'd come visit like in July or August, and they go, oh, this is really not bad. It's good weather. It's actually not as hot as some of the places in California. And I go, and then they move in September, of course, school year starts, and then it starts raining about the third week of September, and they say, when's it going to end? And I just go, May. They're like, no way. I say, yeah, way.
I actually moved here the third week of September. So that sounds exactly right. It started raining the day my moving truck got here. So that was awesome. And I walk to work every day because I live 2 blocks from work. I live like right next to the Space Needle. It's incredible. But yeah, walking to work in the rain, not so much fun.
I know. It's how we throttle the number of Californians that actually move up because only some of them can stand the rain. It works pretty well. It's a kind of a natural throttle in the whole thing. Well, that's enough about us. We're running out of time here, so I just want to say what I always say. We'll see you again next time on Floss Weekly.